My name's Christine. I'm a pensioner from Glasgow. You're very welcome to my first podcast, Unmuzzled at 67. Maybe it should be called Confessions of a Pensioner. But just so you know, I've never done this before. I've never been in front of a camera before. I don't even like getting my photos taken. And I don't like social media. Yeah, here I am at 67, venturing into new territories, trying my hand as a podcaster and opening an Instagram account, completely out of my comfort zone. Let's see how it goes. So what's going to happen is I'm going to tell you a story every week on the podcast that is based on my own life experiences. But before we kick a ball, let's get the ground rules out. Let's talk about the format that there's going to be within these podcasts. So, here's the 5-minute warning. There will be profanities. There will be references to mental health, suicide, domestic violence, alcoholism. It's all going to be there. In fact, when you read it like that, it sounds more like a fucking horror story. And of course, names have been changed to protect the innocent. So seriously, if material like this might offend you, you might as well beat it. Scroll on, this is not for you. So back to me. Are you asking yourself, why is she doing this now? At 67, you think she'd be taking life a wee bit easier rather than flinging herself in front of cameras and all that kind of thing. Well, the truth is that I have come to believe that if I get all this off my shoulders, get all this stuff at 50 years of living, that the person that will benefit the most is me. And the fact that the stories are told my way, in my style, makes it more authentic for me. So that, I think, is probably the purpose. I think as well it's going to help me to come to terms with my life, accept some of the bad behaviour, you know, some of the really raw stuff, and help me take responsibility. That's a big thing as well. For me, every story should be heard, every story should be listened to, as far as everybody else is concerned. My message to the old people like me is, maybe because of my own experience, it's never too late to turn your life around. See if you're unhappy. Don't accept it. Don't put up with it. Do something about it. We all deserve peace and happiness. So for me, this is the right time. This is the right thing to do. And I'm ready to be unmuzzled at 67. So if you met me, you probably think to yourself, she looks like somebody that's got it all organised. She looks like somebody that's, that's got it all together. But the reality was very, very different. Inside my head was like a car crash. I was at war with myself. I didn't understand myself. And I didn't understand the way I behaved at times. And I couldn't control my knee-jerk reactions. And that got me into trouble, particularly at work. People just thought it was an absolute fucking bam or a rocket. So there was constant inner conflict. And it took me until I was 60 when I finally decided to learn how to meditate. The reason for that was I wanted to calm down. I wanted to calm down my thinking. I wanted to slow down my thinking. Things needed to change. I didn't want to be a bam into my 60s as well. Things had to be different. I felt that I owed it to myself to at least make an effort. So I'm lucky that happened quite quickly. I mean, after a year of that, of doing meditation, that really did happen. I was calmed down. I was thinking more rationally, thinking things through. A brand new experience for me. So that was great. But something else happened that was very unexpected for me. And that was that slowly, some of the memories of things that had happened to me as a child and a young adult started to emerge. Just slowly, not suddenly, not dramatically, but just almost organically, these memories, and they were so vivid. It was like living them for the first time, because, you know, a lot of things that happened to me, particularly in my teenage years, were completely suppressed. Now I can see they were suppressed. I was born in a time when we never discussed difficulties. So here I was, not really having a choice, I suppose you could say, is not really have a choice whether I wanted to face these or not. They were there and they followed me about. So they needed to be dealt with. And what I decided to do was write them down. So just to make sure I wouldn't forget them all, because I started saying to myself, God, that's right. I forgot about that. I forgot that had happened to me. So I wrote it all down and kind of I wrote a book, I suppose you could say. I wasn't smart enough to type it. I just wrote things down as they came into my head. And that's what I'm using today. So it might come across as a wee bit scripted, but I'm actually using the notes that I did at that time to make sure I don't forget anything. Fuck's sake, I'm 67, I'm no 27. So the memories aren't there as the way they were before. So so I'm referring to the notes just to make sure that I get all the details in. So let's start the story in the real watch with mother style. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. So I was born in the 50s. I was born in Glasgow to a respectable family, a mum and a dad and an older brother. At times we had a dog as well. And we had a nice life. I would say it was nice in the sense of it being fairly uneventful. But in terms of a child growing up, we had a nice house, we had food on the table, we had security. I think we had love, but not love as we understand it now. I was never told I was loved, never was told I was important. I don't think anybody was in the 60s. It just wasn't the way people were brought up. But it was a nice life. I felt secure and I think I was happy. And I was an obedient child, just did what I was told. There was always food on the table. And we had holidays. A lot of people didn't have holidays. So in some ways we were a bit luckier than other families. But the main thread that ran through our lives, and I think most people that we knew living in the 60s anyway, was the church, or if you were a Catholic, the chapel. So, but the church wasn't just for Sundays for our family. It was for a big part of the week. So my mother, for example, was in the Women's Guild. She was in something called the Eastern Star as well. And she was involved in the church jumble sale. She was on the committee. She did the Christmas fairs, all that kind of thing. So, you know, she was involved during the week and stuff like that as well. As for me, I was in the choir. I was in the Girls' Brigade. What else? Stuff, not just Sunday stuff, but, you know, being involved quite a lot. So that was our ordinary life. My brother was involved as well and my dad. So I briefly want to talk about being brought up in the 60s in terms of our parents. So my parents were the same as most parents in the 60s. They had both been involved and lived through the Second World War. So, for example, my dad was, before he met my mum, would be 5 or 6 years abroad in the army. And my mother worked in a munitions factory where they made munitions. I think it was for planes. So, they had 6 years. That war went on for nearly 6 years. They had rationing, which meant they were only given so much. Every human being, including babies, were only given so much food to eat. You had a ration book, took it to the shops and you got what you got. That was it. There wasn't another way to get food. So sometimes I think people must have been a wee bit hungry in those days as well. There was blackouts, there was no streets. You had to cover your windows at night to make sure no light get out of them. And so, people as well would be watching some men returning home, maybe not as well as they were when they left. And in those days, if your husband couldn't work, it was mostly men that worked in those days, not so much women. Women tended to have quite big families. And so that was a job in itself, cooking and cleaning and looking after lots of children in those days. And if your man didn't work, you really were in trouble because there was no help from the government at all. So you could starve or, huge sense of community in those days, and people living in tenements and helping each other out. But it was hard. It was hard. So sometimes when I look back at my parents' life, I think, no wonder they were a wee bit hard with us. They were a wee bit this old stiff upper lip, a wee bit of that kind of thing, and just get on with it and pick yourself up and don't give us your worries, just keep going. But then there's reasons why people behave, isn't there? There's always a story behind that. And I think I'm glad I didn't live through those times, because it must have been quite difficult. In the 60s, Cam says to me, Cam, who helps me with this project, who's incredible, says to me, it's much the same now, Christine, that there's a big thing about how we look to other people through Facebook, through social media. In those days, respectability was the key, but it was all about how you looked. It was all about how you presented yourself. And it would be the end of the world for my mother if she was ever the subject of gossip. So we had to play the game. We had to do what was right and do what was seen to be respectable as individuals as well as a family. So back to me. Here we are, age 11. Not much point in talking about stuff before age 11. Nothing happening really, just much of the background I've told you already. Age 11, bit of a chunky monkey, quite an overweight young lassie, shy, timid, and a good student. But just between, as I'm in my last year of primary school, just about to start to go into secondary school, boobs started growing. So horrific. It was horrific. My mother never mentioned it. I never mentioned it. And we just got on with it. So I seem to spend all my time pulling my jumpers out like this, trying to create a bigger space in the hope that nobody would see these boobs that were growing. It was a constant worry for me, a constant worry. And worried that anybody would say, "You growing boobs?" Nobody ever did, but there was a constant anxiety that somebody would. I was very embarrassed about it and very, very, very self-conscious. Worse than that, when I was going into secondary school, there was more PE, you had to jump about the place and, again, very conscious of the boobs. So before I went to secondary school, what actually happened was that at age 11, I took my periods. And I'd like to tell you that story. So picture this. It's our house, Sunday afternoon. My mother's got the Women's Guild round for afternoon tea, and she's letting them into the gold room. Now, the gold room in our house was the room set aside for visitors only. A lock on the door. There was no visitors. Door was locked. Nobody was getting in. And the gold room was, as you probably imagine, gold. So there was gold sofas, gold wallpaper, gold carpet, gold curtains, the full boona. And when nobody was in it, there was plastic put over the sofas to keep them good. So that was opened up. In all the women go from the Women's Guild. They're all sitting there. My mother's bought the cakes for the city bakeries. She's made the sandwiches. She's cutting about with a gold hostess trolley, giving them all their tea. They're all sitting there with their hats on, because in those days, women would take their coat off, but they kept their hats on. That's how it worked. And see, when you think about that, thinking about them all sitting there on these sofas with their hats on. But anyway, that's what they did in those days. So next thing that happens is I'm up in the bathroom. Blood is gushing out of me. So I can't get it to stop. I've got half a toilet roll up me. And I'm thinking, I've got to be dying. It must be, there's no other reason for this. What the fuck? The place is like a bloodbath. So I'm screaming down the stairs to my mother. Help! Help! Get an ambulance! I'm dying! Get up here! No response. No response at all. So I have to lift it up an octave, make it a wee bit louder. Help! Help! All this. Get up here! Phone a doctor! All that stuff. And in the gold room, that was picked up by one of the women from the Women's Guild. And she said, Margaret, do you think that's your daughter calling you? And my mother said in her Women's Guild voice, it's not really how she spoke, I think you're right. Please let me go and investigate. I'll be back shortly. Lays the gold trolley to the one side, absolutely fucking raging at being interrupted, runs up the stairs like this. Fires open the door, ready to get stuck into me for shouting and disrupting her afternoon. And what's she greeted with? Me, hysterical on the floor, blood everywhere, shouting and screaming for an ambulance. What's going on? What's going on? And she's saying, what's happened to you? You cut yourself? Have you injured? What have you done? She can't understand. I'm 11. I'm not expected to take my periods till I'm about 15. Some lasses were 17 taking their periods in those days. So she's not even thinking that's what it is. And she's up and she's trying to look at me. And I'm so hysterical I can't even explain. And all she can see is this toilet roll coming out of me. So finally she must have thought to herself, that must be her periods, right enough. So she's not ready. She thinks she's got 5 years before she's got to do this talk with me. So she's probably scrambling in her head thinking, what the fuck am I going to say to this wee lassie here? You know, hysterical. Can he stop crying? I can't understand why the doctor's no here, why there's no an ambulance. So she says, this is you becoming a woman now. And I'm saying, I don't want to be a woman. I just want to be a wee lassie. That didn't work. She says, this is called your periods. And you'll be getting these every month. Every month? No! Oh, that's so... She's just not hitting the mark at all. And she's making things worse, actually. So then she says, Christine, even the Queen gets her periods. I'm starting to calm down a bit now. The Queen gets her periods, I said. She says, uh-huh. I said, I didn't know that. Do all women, all the women, you, Mum, do you have your period? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. We all get it. Mm-hmm. I never knew. I couldn't tell the Queen had periods. You couldn't tell that. So I guess I must have thought to myself, well, if the Queen can cope with periods, I'm going to be able to cope with them and all. So that calms me down. She's away to her room to bring me the big giant sanitary pad, which it was in those days, which was about that thick and that long. So she sorts me out, fixed up with the sanitary pad. And, you know, I'm really in pain, and fires me into the bedroom, and hot water bottle. That was the answer for all things in those days. Hot water bottle put in your stomach. She's away back down to the Women's Guild. And must have told them some fancy story with her Women's Guild voice. So fast forward a wee bit, and here is me now into secondary school. And now I've got several things to deal with. Number one, I'm still the only person that's got boobs in the class, a big lassie. Everybody seems to be skinny as anything. Number two, I've now got periods to deal with, and there's nobody with a period. Well, nobody's mentioning anything about periods in first year. So the most worrying time of the week for me would be on the PE days at secondary school when you had to wear the navy knickers. So I'm trying to shoot hoops into the netball thing, worried about my boobs jumping up and down and this big giant pad rolling around, and is anybody going to see it with these knickers? Worst of all, it was in the playground. So you've got all the boys and, you know, older people, you know, people in older pupils walking past and having a look. And sometimes they would stop to have a look at the, you know, to see who was winning and all that kind of things. It was fucking so embarrassing. So embarrassing. And that went on for at least to the end of first year. So if you don't mind, I'm going to leave the first story there, leave you with those lovely visions in your head. And the next time the story I'm going to be talking about is something that happened to me that completely changed my course in life. And you might be quite surprised at what it was. So thanks very much for joining me. glad the first episode's over. We've had to film it twice, Cam will tell you. So it's been a wee bit nerve-wracking, but we've got through it. And if you've been watching me, thank you so much. I really appreciate your company, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.